Developed by Team Ninja and published by Koei Tecmo in 2017, originally for the Sony PlayStation 4, on personal computer was that of Nioh. Taking place in the year of 1600, a mystical energy source known in the West as Amrita is sought by Queen Elizabeth I to gain an edge against Spain during the Anglo-Spanish War. Details have it that in the game, an Englishman by the name of William journeys to Japan to confront Edward Kelly, who seeks to use the Amrita for his own schemes. When William eventually arrives in Japan, he becomes involved within pivotal events of Japan's history and meets a number of people who aid him in his journey. The standard ending for the basic game had William kill Kelly and depart back for England, while the true ending of the game had William discover the ultimate reasons for him going to Japan, and once he settles the situation he has in England, he later remembers all of the people he had met in Japan and decides to return. Downloadable content to extend the story of Nioh has William back in Japan, the said content being Dragon of the North, Defiant Honor, and Bloodshed's End. The origins of Nioh date back to roughly 2004, as the game was originally supposed to be released for the PlayStation 3, with plot-based details having the game being inspired from an unfinished Akira Kurosawa screenplay. As development for the game was somewhat tumultuous, as staff were divided as to how the game should be made or even what it should be about, as eventually a concept for the game was made, and in 2016 an unfinished version of the game was released to test critic receptions on gamer reactions, as once feedback was received, the story and concept was slightly modified and the final version of the game was released in 2017. Reactions to Nioh were somewhat mixed from critics and gamers. While there were praises for the concepts of the finished game and William as the main focus of the game, complaints were about the story was somewhat confusing, and other facts or characters relating to the game were somewhat vague, because there were multiple endings for the game and downloadable content that players might or might not have played or experienced affected their point of view with the game's story. Despite some mixed sentiment from critics and gamers about William on the game that was Nioh, a sequel was released in 2020. However, William didn't return as the main character, and the sequel was largely instead a prequel-based story to Nioh 1, but to keep a connection to the original game, details in the sequel's main game had William appear as a supporting character towards the end of the game's playthrough. Details from Nioh 2 had William remain in Japan after the details of the downloadable content from the first Nioh, and actually having a life there, due to not being any real reasons for William to return to England. Dialogue also mentioned that he had a young son by the name of Joseph, who was being trained in the arts of ninjutsu and samurai-based techniques by one of his friends that he had met during the first Nioh, Hattori Hanzo. What was interesting was that in optional side quests, Joseph bequeathed Gyokuto to the player, which was actually the guardian spirit from Okatsu, as dialogue mentioned by Maria had it that there was another reason why William decided to remain within Japan, as he had met and fallen in love with a woman, though she wasn't named. It's highly likely that due to events in the original Nioh, William married Okatsu and they had a son together being Joseph, but peculiarly Okatsu herself wasn't depicted nor mentioned in the original game. Theories on speculation had it that one of the reasons why William wasn't the main character in Nioh 2 was that he was based off William Adams, a real-life individual who was one of the first foreigners to live and die within Japan. Also, due to the circumstances from the original story of Nioh, details of William's adaptation for the game were somewhat vague, especially with the historical details that with the original William dying in the 1620s, and the final years of the game in Nioh 2 had it in 616, so William would have died soon after either way, and a prequel to the plot seemed more likely, even if there were further plans for William in the Nioh-based games. In terms of story chronology or continuity, there couldn't be that much more done with the character. Sometimes the character can be forgotten because details for them weren't meant to be known, but too much details for them would have potentially corroborated historical facts at which the character was originally based on.